a one, a two, a three. Licky, 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 bum, bum. Shooby, dooby, 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 up, down. I say heavy chef, I say heavy chef, I say heavy chef, I say heavy chef. Licky, 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 bum, bum. Shooby, dooby, 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 up, down. I say heavy chef, I say heavy chef, I say heavy chef, I say heavy chef.
First of all, can we have a big round of applause for our two speakers? Tonight, obviously, our theme is a very creative one. We've got two of South Africa's finest speaking to us about design thinking, which is an incredibly vital and crucial and important and really, I think, stimulating topic that we can all deploy within our businesses and within our lives. So I'm very, very excited to talk about that. Before I sit down with our two esteemed guests, I just want to say a quick shout out and thank you to a few people. First of all, the Heavy Chef team, Zinkle, Randall, Bronwyn, Zola, Jade, Kerry, Mo, Siyabonga, Lucanio, Yolandi, Charmaine, Louis, and of course Mike over there. And just to honor them for all the hard work that goes behind the scenes. It's actually a really small team compared to the output that we have. Just a quick question to this crowd. Who here has been to a Heavy Chef before? Okay, so about 50% of you. Who here is actually a member of Heavy Chef? So you've actually signed up to Heavy Chef. Okay, so about 25% of you. Okay, so there's the opportunity here. In that, there are 2 QR codes on either side of this room. There's also a couple of us wearing T-shirts, a guy called Dean who's got a crutch, and he's walking around. He's going to be encouraging everybody to sign up. It's 100% free, courtesy of all these amazing partners and our collaboration with various entities that have enabled us to provide all of this learning. So I do encourage you to check it out. There's over 3,000 of those learning bites, the little videos, the recipes that we provide on all these different topics, and with just an amazing and very diverse and incredibly authoritative panel of people who are delivering those recipes. And so I wanted to also mention that we are here because of our amazing partners. We've got some banners, and you can see the partners' logos up top there, but a special mention to the xneelo crew, who I think are here en masse. Whenever there's one, there's always 10. So can we have a hands up? Who's here from the xneelo? Okay, there we go. So xneelo is by far the best hosting company in the Southern Hemisphere, and Mike and I have a long-standing partnership with xneelo way back from our digital marketing days. So hola to the xneelo crew. Payfast, who's also been a supporter right from the start. Xero, the most beautiful cloud accounting software in the world. Workshop 17, Whipping the Cat, which is a legal firm with a great name. Baxberg, the wine that we're drinking over there. So Fruit, Good Leaf CBD water, Creed Living, Global Citizen, as well as the tech teams, TechX, Jared, Tion, who are just making sure that everything is working well, I hope, tonight, the whole night. And the tech team in Johannesburg, Black Maverick. So just a last point in terms of the partnerships and the collaborations. We do have a prize tonight, as I mentioned. It's in this bag over here, and it's worth quite a bit of money. I just want to mention actually what is in the bag, so and how you will win it. So the bag contains some Creed or Sally Ann Creed goodies, some beauty bullets, which is basically collagen that's in these little capsules. God knows we all need some of them, and also it's got these little tea capsules that are also infused with collagen. Everything is infused with collagen nowadays. We've got books, the xneelo marketing book. We've got the Xero Starting a Business book. And we also have 3 Xero workouts, a voucher which is worth 3,875 Rand. It's a 3-month membership. Andrew Collins, who's the founder, is sitting at the back there. So if you want to find out about it, it's a freaking incredible idea. It's also an entrepreneur within the Heavy Chef community, and it's an AI-driven 30-minute workout. So basically all the catchphrases are within your business. So I'm very stoked to see that we're representing you, sir. And then also we are giving away 10 of the xneelo books tonight. So that's for the questions that are going to be asked by the audience. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick off the questions tonight, and I'm going to be starting the conversation with our esteemed speakers. And then I'm going to ask Siyabonga to come around with the roving mic, and then I'll look at the hands that are going up, and then we will give you a chance to ask Carla and Richard some questions. And then the first 10 questions, please make them good questions, not podcasts. And if they could actually be questions, and then we will give you a book, and inside the book is going to be a 3 Xero voucher. We've got 10 of them tonight, and each of those vouchers is for a workout with Andrew's startup, and each one of them, if I remember correctly, is worth 1,999 Rand. So it's a pretty good prize for asking a pretty good question. All right, so I feel like I've been hogging the stage properly. So I'm going to try and stimulate some good conversation and get the questions flowing. So first of all, welcome to both of you. It's so great to have both of you on stage. And with, I think, what is really just such an amazing topic. And I think let's kick off with probably the most important one, which is, what is design thinking? And maybe if we can have a bit of a quick intro. Carla, I'm going to start with you just to talk around the notion of design thinking and what it is, so that we can all understand it and differentiate it from just plain design, I suppose. And then, Richard, if we can then speak to you about how it's evolved within this building and what this amazing building that we're so privileged to be hosting this event in. So let's start with you, Carla, and if you can open up with a little bit of an introduction.
I'm going to approach the question from the perspective of an entrepreneur, and also pay homage to the designers in the room. If we could just see a show of hands, how many individuals define themselves as designers, by heart, by trade, right? In so many ways, homage. Design thinking has really matured so many designerly ways of thinking and doing. Designers, by their very nature, practice design thinking. It's embedded in who they are. And from an entrepreneur's point of view, design thinking really considers the value that you wish to create. And if you could just envisage that in your mind, have a particular business model in mind, or what is the value that you wish to create? Design thinking, borrowing the designly ways, would then really deeply consider that value from the perspective of the individuals for whom you're creating value. So that human connect is at the center of everything that you do, what people think, what they feel, what they hope, how they experience value. And in the world that I'm most deeply involved in, marketing, we often tend to create these quick fix wallpaper constructs. Customer satisfaction. What does that mean? Satisfaction, and satisfied by what, how, and for whom, and might Richard's sense of satisfaction differ ever so slightly from mine? And what do you intend as an entrepreneur? So design thinking really considers the individual or the community or the society for whom you're creating a particular value, and ensures that you are in constant conversation with the community and constant conversation with the people for whom you're creating value, hopefully to such an extent that you begin to co-create and co-design and co-develop and co-initiate, because the source of innovation, the source of creativity would be the individual for whom you're creating difference.
That's such a beautiful way of unpacking it, and I think you bring such a lyrical way, and almost in it pays homage in just the right way to such a creative process. And I think, Richard, if you can pick up the baton from that and maybe talk about a little bit about from the framework sense, if that's possible. There are some clear frameworks that have been created, most famously and notably by IDEO, but maybe from your perspective at the Hasso Plattner D School.
Yeah, no, thanks, Fred. I think to build on what Carla said, that this designly way of thinking has traditionally lived in those that have gone through some sort of formal design education. At school, if you, for whatever reason, chose that pathway or were suggested to go that pathway, this designing way of thinking, this creativity is nurtured. And you go through, whether it's undergraduate or postgraduate, and then into industry, it's continuously reinforced and practiced. And it just becomes a way of thinking and a way of doing, and sort of almost a way of being. And sort of what Carla's referring to, sort of this sort of designly way of thinking. And really, back in, when was it, the early 2000s, when the first D school was established at Stanford University, coming out of IDEO in that space, is really what they were saying is that we actually all have the capacity to be creative as human beings. It's one of our natural traits, and you shouldn't have to have gone through a formal design education to be called a designer. We all have that capacity. And so in some ways they democratized design and actually disrupted the design education profession to a degree a lot. Got people really thinking, okay, well, in some ways almost threatened these traditional institutions that would teach design. And in some ways they sort of codified this lens that designers use. So they started to teach that to students that were at the university that hadn't joined the university to design. It was from students in humanities or students in marketing or students coming from health science. And so they created a sort of a learning and teaching space where they started to nurture and build the sort of creative capacity that we all have as humans. And the real value started to come in at an individual level, is where myself as perhaps a law student suddenly gets introduced to this way of thinking, and then marry that back to my world of law. And that's where the magic starts to happen, because suddenly you are unlocking this sort of creative capacity within a discipline of law. And really that's what the D School, after Stanford and Potsdam, and now this one in Cape Town, is really about how do we unlock that creative confidence in the students at the university, who, when they walk into this space, have no idea that they have the capacity to be creative, and they have these sort of real aha moments. And then pulling that back to entrepreneurship, it actually gives them that confidence to identify a challenge or a problem or an area of concern, and have the confidence to do something about it, to come up with ideas and have that confidence to try out ideas that they have and fail. And we teach students here how to fail, which is something that you're not taught a little bit higher up the hill. We embrace failure as part of the learning journey, which is what you would learn in an art and design college, how to bring failure into your creative process. So we sort of almost rewiring their brains. We don't create professional designers. There's still going to be needs for professional designers out there. But what we're sort of saying is that everybody's got a role to play in the design process. It's about opening that opportunity that everybody can contribute and bring in what their perspective, and the innovation sits in the diversity of the thinking. So if you've got an engineering student and a commerce student and a health science student working on a challenge, the innovation of the idea they generate is because of that, the three of them coming at it from different perspectives. But they haven't been taught how to work together across disciplines. So that's also an important part of that learning journey.
I'm already starting to see some of the parallels and the overlaps with the art of entrepreneurship. And I intentionally say art because my feeling is that entrepreneurship is probably, in my view anyway, the most ultimate manifestation of the creative endeavor, because you have to not only create something that's sitting in the, the kernel of your, like sits in your mind, but then also create the canvas upon which you manifest this thing. And it's really difficult, right? And failure is a really important part of that. And I think, I'm very glad that you said that, because I think certainly in South Africa, there's such a big stigma around failure. And failure is such an important part of the learning process, right? So, speaking of processes, Carla, if we can talk a little bit about the evolution of design and how it's changed from the early days of Vega and when you started and to, how you're thinking about design and maybe some of the important insights that you've seen from that journey.
I think for us, it's always been in context of what it is that we stand for. And I have a number of Veganites from our community they've all joined us this evening. So as Veganites, we're known as creative solution seekers. But with that comes an incredible responsibility if you're engaging with young minds, because you are making a particular promise to industry. And the promise to industry is that these are individuals who are confident to collaborate, and they are driven to find original and meaningful solutions to challenges. And therein lies the magic that Richard described, because to be original, and the entrepreneurs would know that in spirit, is about being confidently creative, but also respectfully creative. And creativity happens when previously unrelated ideas connect. And Richard described the diversity of thought and people thinking about things, sharing thinking from various perspectives, looking at the same challenge through different lenses. And again, the possibility that two previously unrelated ideas connect is at the heart of it a very mature skill, incredibly mature skill. It requires of you to be present. It requires of you to be able to listen and absorb and to hold all those preconceived ideas and assumptions that you might have. Those are very mature skills to develop over time. One day when I'm all grown up, hopefully, but embed that in an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old with confidence, but also with respect. Arrogance, again, shapes another state of being. So all of these soft skills are critical for us. That has evolved in really, we're very blessed to be working with incredibly smart people, and we live in 3 domains, at the very least: business, design, and brand communications, and we create as many opportunities as possible for the students to collaborate across disciplines and to engage with real-life challenges from the word go. So again, respectfully engaging with clients, the challenges they encounter, working in collaborative teams, maturing into doing so online. In your final year, we work entirely in collaborative styles online, because we know our designers might be building UX strategies with designers in Berlin or wherever, and how do I build those collaborative, just look at the space we're in, seek diversity, lead with curiosity, play with possibilities, and doing all of that online in transdisciplinary teams. Yeah, we live in an exciting world. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And I think if I look at, I mean, the topics and the tenets that we're speaking about today, I mean, these are things that I think are really, really relevant to entrepreneurship, right? Just the IDEO framework, which is empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And that's quite similar to the lean startup model. And, you know, I know, Mike, we've spoken at the digital agency about the agile approach. And, you know, these are, I suppose, concepts and frameworks that I would imagine come quite naturally to entrepreneurs. So can we talk about, I mean, it feels almost like an obvious question, but how can entrepreneurs apply this design thinking framework to their business problems? And Richard, I mean, I think this is probably a swing and a
absolutely,
hit for you.
yeah. So I think we break down design thinking into sort of mindsets, and that there's a lot of similarity between entrepreneurial mindsets and a design mindset. And you know, at the end of the day, entrepreneurship is about having that the grit and the tenacity to, and the bravery to try something and to experiment and build. You know, we don't get involved so much here around the business model side, technology side. We focus a lot on the entry point into the problem. And as Carla mentioned, it's the value. You know, who am I creating value for? And as soon as you've identified that, the business model and the technology often drop out of the process because, well, they become relevant and emerge. And so at the end of the day, for us, we always tell the students to focus from a human-centered perspective, like the desirability. What's the need that I'm trying to solve here? You know, there's no point developing a technological marvel piece with an amazing business model if nobody wants it. So the first entry point is, what's the need that I'm trying to address here? And it's not an easy, need finding is not an easy thing to do, and there's some tools and processes that one can bring into that, but enter the problem space through that need lens. And I think entrepreneurs naturally do that often. They see somebody struggling with something, and the successful entrepreneurs start at that point. I think the ones that struggle are the ones that maybe have a piece of technology and they're trying to find a fit for it somewhere. And they're sort of reversing it into a space which maybe it's not necessarily addressing a specific need. So that human piece for me is really the starting point. And it talks back to Carla's point around creating value. If you're not creating value for somebody, it doesn't matter what you put out there, they're not going to buy into it. And then, even just with the need, there's a lot of assumptions that's made, and so you are hypothesizing, I wonder if this might work, and it's about building and testing and failing and picking yourself up, and so that's where the sort of the grit and the tenacity comes in. But there is a process, you know, there's structure to the thinking. The challenge is if you Google lean startup or design thinking, you know, people get confused of which one, and essentially they're all doing the same thing. You know, there's lots of people that are trying to marry all these models and whatever, but the mastery is in developing your own process based on your own context and your own product and the value that you're trying to create. So I wouldn't, you know, don't get hooked up on the perfect process or the model, but just sort of in some ways follow your instinct. You know, design is actually, it's very logical and it's very instinctive. It's not a paint by numbers thing. Yeah.
I love that, and I think there's quite a few lessons in that for the entrepreneur. But you know, my takeout as well is to be. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, but to be okay with failure, to be okay with mistakes, because you actually get the most amount of data from that. You know, lean startup is about testing an assumption and be able to receive the feedback and then just to iterate. So it's this continual, ever evolving process of you know, I guess, looking at the data and applying improvements to it as you go. So, and you know, Agile, all of these methodologies, they apply that same principle, right? And that's not new. I mean, this is not a new fancy buzzword. I mean, this is, Edison was talking about, you know, I didn't fail 1,000 times. I learned 1,000 times how to do it better, you know? And that's like 100 odd years ago.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think if you start to look at, you know, design thinking came out of the design profession. So it brings a lot of the philosophy and structures from that way. Lean startup is about, you know, how do you do things efficiently? And so there was a lot of very useful mindsets that sit in there. And then Agile is, you know, it's come out of the software industry. So there's lessons learned from there. And it's about how you marry that all together. Not as okay, I'll do this piece first, then that piece. You know, I'll do design thinking first, then I'll do Agile, and then I'll do Lean, or then Agile, whatever the case may be. It's how do I get from point A to B in a way where I'm adding value and I'm doing it efficiently and I'm learning along that journey. Yeah.
And I love also the mention of human-centered as well, and I think that's really important. I mean, both of you have alluded to the fact that we're providing value to real humans, right? And you can almost get lost in such a technically rich and diverse world at the moment where we are just being accosted by so many new technologies. And one of the questions that I have here, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor. So just a note as I ask this question, if there's any hands that if there's questions. Okay, Patricia, over there, I've got a question. And a couple more. Okay, good. Okay, so there are some questions. I'm just gonna ask one question, and then we're gonna take the roving mic. Thanks, Siyabonga. I want to talk a little bit about AI. I mean, it's kind of like the elephant in the room, right? So, I mean, even creatives are looking at this thing of AI and going, "Oh, Khona, like, what is this thing that's about to take my job?" Right? And this is not the first time that we've heard that, right? So. I want to talk about the idea of, I mean, I suppose the threats and opportunities that are provided by AI and creativity. I mean, let's look at glass half empty and also half full. So, Carla, do you want to take a stab at the impossible?
And do so respectfully. Okay, so who do I feel deeply for? A recent project that we've been engaged with, traffic patterns in Cape Town, drive styles in Cape Town, individuals responsible for policy making and so forth. I think they are deeply concerned, and I respect that. In the world of education, we are growing increasingly more excited about the possibility of AI being a companion in learning how to frame questions, credible skill, to ask the perfect question, if such a thing exists, especially in design thinking. The ability to craft the prompt that is going to get you to an agile first level of understanding. And then, of course, our creative folk all know that when you play with AI, it has an ability to connect what has been connected. It is not in a state of being where it is connecting the previously unconnected. And it's actually quite, there's a gorgeous curiosity in playing with AI. Go and feed any metaphor into AI and see what it produces. It ain't there yet. So in the creative realm, take a deep breath. Go play with it.
Thank you for those sage words. I'm going to ask for the roving mics.
I was listening to the question that was asked, what is design thinking? And I heard your answering. And in my mind, I'm like, would it be problem solving? Are we talking about, when we look at entrepreneurs, we have so much problems to solve, yet we do not know sometimes. Now, when you do business, of course, you have to look at what it is that you want to address. So would you say to me that design thinking is intertwine or go in line with problem solving, looking at the problem, mapping the problem, making sure you look at possibilities? Would you say to me that's design thinking?
I think you have the essence there, definitely. It's also encouraging us to really ensure that when we go about defining that challenge, that we genuinely understand it from the perspective of the individual for whom we're creating a product or a service or a solution. So one of the beautiful expressions in design thinking is a lived reality. And one individual's lived reality is not another's lived reality. Again, from our own perspective, over time, there are concepts that cause distance in thinking, like target market. Just consider the language of that construct. There's a market that I'm targeting. As an entrepreneur, you have the privilege to connect with people with whom you wish to develop a relationship over time, add value at scale, and continue to innovate and sustain that value. So, yes, at the heart of it, but it's really doing so from the outside in as much as you're doing so from the inside out. And when Fred challenged us with what is the question you have, I said to Richard, for me the big challenge is, how do you embed design thinking in your everyday doing and thinking as an entrepreneur? How do you grow such a culture? How do you instill it in all the people that you work with, even your strategic partners? And I think language often trips us up, and we need to keep in mind that one lived reality is not another lived reality.
Pumela, thank you for that question and for that lovely answer.
My question is particularly to Richard. I recently came across one of your ventures that you explored, the Khayelitsha Bandwidth Barn, and some of the nuggets that you picked up from there. And I came across the concept of failing cheaper, failing faster, as opposed to failing slower. And I just wanted to ask, how do we cultivate that culture in the age of instant gratification? I want it now, yesterday. And what mechanisms do you use here at the D School to actually cultivate that culture amongst young people primarily in the TikTok age? Thank you so much.
A great question.
Thank you. The 30-second age. So just, briefly on the Bandwidth Barn, I was involved in that project, in fact, when it started in Lower Long Street. And in those days, it was before we had internet, high-speed internet, and the idea was to create a building that we could get really good bandwidth into and see if that could be a catalyst for young startups. Because in those days, it was dial-up modems and that sort of thing. And interestingly enough, we created it. It was probably one of the first, sort of incubatory shared office space in Cape Town. And my biggest reflection there was we attracted a lot of young startups who were looking for easy access to the internet, a community of practice. And we helped set it up, and then we ran it for about 2 years, and my observation was we'd actually created a place which didn't accelerate failing. We almost created too much of a nurtured environment. And often, at the end of 2 years, there were a couple of startups there that should have actually failed 18 months ago. And what the Bandwidth Barn was doing is it was just extending the inevitable that these young startups would probably fail. But, we would offer them subsidized rental, there was subsidized access to internet and that sort of thing. So the harsh realities of starting a business, the individuals weren't exposed to. And I think for us, and what we teach here, which is so critical, is that need to fail early, fail fast, and fail cheaply, which is easy to say but very hard to do. And so the way we teach that, it's experiential. We get students to build something and go and test it. If you've got an idea, just build it, make it, and then go out there and find the person that you have trying to add value to and ask them the question, what do you think of this? And it doesn't mean you have to, if it's an app or something, it doesn't mean you have to spend months developing an app. Just do a journey map, or just map it out by hand on a piece of paper and take it to them, say, conceptually, this is what I'm thinking. That's a way of testing your idea. So it's so important to get that idea out early. And literally, what we do work with big corporates who've got massive budgets, and they'll develop a product over 5, 6, 7 months, 8 months, millions and millions of rands. They launch it and it just doesn't work. And then they throw a whole lot of marketing spend at it to try and get people to buy this thing that they don't want. Whereas what they should have done is the first week is go and test that idea, very rudimentary, and fail, and then build from there. And that's where the failing early and fail fast and fail cheaply sort of comes into. So it's a practice you have to get into. And it's difficult for people because we're not trained to fail. It's not part of our DNA. Our educational system doesn't encourage it.
No, so my name is Sarah. I'm not from South Africa. I hope you will understand me. And I have so many questions, but first I want to talk.
You have one.
Yeah, I have one. Okay, yeah.
Anyway,
you have a beautiful country and beautiful experts. Thank you for this event. My question more practical. And there is no right answer, actually. I'm from computer science. I studied computer science, neuroscience, cognitive science. I've been project manager, product manager in entrepreneurship for 20 years. I played for different teams. And when you told that actually there is no a right approach, all this lean, agile, design thinking, you always need to find your way. I absolutely agree with you. I can put all my money on it. But I have one problem, and I want actually ask both experts about that. Problem of local optimum. When you do this, it doesn't matter, design thinking, agile, when you do the thing, it's actually feedback loop. And you have a feedback, and then you decide how to improve your product. But it's always the risk to find local optimum. The thing, the position that's fine for now, and you just keep going. And then actually, based on my experience, it's a difference between great products and good products. When you just stop in local optimum. What do you think? What is your personal opinion? How you can make great products? How you can pass this local optimum? Sorry. Thank you.
Got it?
Let me go first. So I'm a firm believer that as an entrepreneur, I've had a lot of entrepreneurial experiences before, is that you'll never build your business out of your first idea, out of your first product. It's a learning journey for you. And I think the great products come out of the experience of these loops. And I think when you start, you don't know if it's going to be a good or great product because of the complexity of the environment that you're going to go into. But I do think that if you keep at it, you will find, and it's up to you to decide what's a good and a great product. I mean, who decides that? Is it the amount of money you make? Is it how happy you are? It's the difference you've made in people's lives. Is it the scale? That's probably dependent on the individual. But I truly believe that often it's not the first one. It's maybe not even the second one. Maybe it's the third or fourth or fifth until you get to a point that, okay, I've made a great product. That's how I'd answer. I haven't given you an exact answer, but I think it can be quite subjective in the scale.
Carla, do you want to have a crack?
And add value to what is already a very real first positioning. So let me take another angle, not a different one, just another. There is also value in really immersing yourself in the space in which you aim to compete. And to consider that space, not from your own perspective, because we are remarkably tainted, we've defined, we've segmented, we've considered direct, indirect, we've created this entire system of activity. People live life. People make choices. People have options. So to really consider the space in which you will function from the perspective of, you know, if it's a political party, it could be citizenry. If it's a new technical app, it could be whatever the case may be. Understand that space in terms of choice. Understand that space in terms of options. Then look at those who've achieved over time iconic status. And if you're saying optimal, for us, that's often kind of iconic shifts. They succeed to redefine a category. They succeed to redefine a segment. And they often do so because of their deep insight into value and redefining value. And previously unrelated thoughts, again, connect. A way of doing so is to really understand the norms in a space. The typical behavior of insurance, the typical behavior of banking, the typical this, the normative that, and the think that has established itself over time. If you consider your value in relation to all of those norms, you begin to disrupt, but with meaning. Not disrupt yourself clean out of the space. That works in the world of music, you know, but so normative, kind of establishing all of those normative patterns can be a very healthy exercise to stretch you in terms of value if you're seeking for optimal behaviors.
What a great answer, thank you. Great two answers. I think there's something in the entrepreneurial segment which is so fascinating to the question, which, I mean, you see this history from, you know, like Edison, instead of candles, you got light bulbs, and you got cars instead of horses, and you got touchscreen instead of, you know, the normal keypad, and I think there's something around just a whole new segment which speaks to that, understanding the norm, but then also really understanding the value and where the value to the human actually lies.
My name is Vusi Vokwana, and I'm the Gasi Catalyst. So I'd like to possibly pose a question to you guys both, to ask maybe if you could tell me if you think the external environment has an impact on design thinking. So if you look at township entrepreneurs, who I work with, versus your urban entrepreneurs, and does in the environment of the township and constantly being exposed to challenges and barriers and obstacles, and therefore having a higher adversity quotient, right, than your urban, more coddled, more sort of, you know, failing, taking longer to fail because the environment actually, you know, sort of covers them for a little bit longer than they should necessarily. So do you think that maybe design thinking might be more geared towards the coddled urban entrepreneur who's never really had to face real obstacles, rather than the township entrepreneur that's been adapting from day one?
Who wants to take that one?
Yes.
And I would agree with Carla on that, yeah. Absolutely. I think if you live in an environment where there are more opportunities, and you've got that lens where you're identifying, coming back to Carla's framing, there's value missing here, and there's opportunities to change that. It's not to say that there aren't opportunities in the other space, but I would say that if you're in an environment that is alive with, I think there's a couple of things. It's alive with opportunities, but it's also the context in which, and the sandbox and the openness of that environment for me to try things out. So I think one also needs to take that into account. Are people willing to, if you see an opportunity, and I think I got an idea that I think can help, you know, that environment that you're in, will they be accepting of that idea? And I mean, I don't have the answer whether there's a difference between the two, but to answer your first question, I think absolutely yes. On
a research level as well, there's global studies that actually align developing market environments with higher levels of connect and disruption and design thinking, because we're not exposed to homogeneous patterns and homogeneous spaces. So as a principle, I always argue with strategists or creatives, designers, at the age of 19, that you are graduating into the most remarkable space because you've been stretched on every level. And the more you develop yourself in this context, and by no means avoid the homogeneous environments, but you're naturally a bit more nimble.
And if I could just quickly add to that, I think if you look at South Africa in the context of more developed nations, they see South Africa, it has less regulation in a lot of spaces, and enables you to actually develop your ideas sort of under the radar. And I know a lot of, specifically in the drone space, to find airspace to test ideas in drones, the United States, it's almost impossible to do that. Whereas here, you could just go into a field and fly the drone, and do it until somebody tells you to stop doing it. So, I think that regulatory environment plays a role, and I think that could also have an impact on local situation, maybe environments which are more stable and maybe more regulated than areas where you can do more experimentation. The regulation will eventually catch you up, but at least you've learnt a lot already in the experiments that you run.
Okay, where's the mic gone? There we go.
Hi, my name is Marley Smith from Brand Love. Just for interest's sake, you're not allowed to use your drone on Lion's Head, I found out the other day.
Found out the hard way.
I only saw the sign afterwards. Okay, but that's not my question. So my question is, so we deal with a lot of big corporates, and you were talking about, failure and not being able to fail. So what would your advice be, potentially for a leader that wants to implement design thinking in their teams, but they might get resistance because of not being able to fail? Whoever wants to take that.
The hospital pass.
I'll start. So we have quite a few corporates that come into the D school wanting to be trained in this mindset, whether it's part of their culture change or wanting to build more innovative thinking across the silos, maybe of the organization as well, more interaction, more co-creation. And the model that we've found that works the best is, and there's a number of case studies around the world in big organizations, is the buy-in from leadership to start with. You need that leader who believes in wanting to bring this way of thinking to change the culture of the organization. And most organizations are sitting in a space where their DNA is in sort of the optimization and efficiency space. So it's all about, we have products, we have services, how do we get more out of it, how do we sell them more efficiently? And the piece of what they've lacked is the sort of more intuitive thinking that the organization needs. That sort of more, that thinking which requires more exploration, more experimentation. They all started there. They were all startups once upon a time. So they all started in the space of entrepreneurship and experimentation. But over time, they sort of shifted across. So the way one positions it is the need to get balance back in the system. So you're not trying to turn every company back into a startup. You're just trying to get some balance back in. And so it's about bringing it, sort of landing this opportunity in a way which is not going to be too disruptive for the organization. But you start with the leadership, the exco, and you give them a very brief experience in this way of working. It's the way we teach, the way design is taught is experiential. So the way we teach design thinking is experiential. But that level is often very time poor, so you can't bring them in for a week or 6 month program. So we give them a very short experience, which creates the excitement, and then you start to work through the layers to the point where who are the actual practitioners in the organization. And then it's not just about the mindset, it's also the physical space, the place that you create. You can't do this in boardrooms, you can't do this on your desk. So you start to work with them a little bit on the ecosystem. So we do quite a bit of work with the HR departments and trying to get them to understand from a structural perspective how you bring this mindset in. And Bosch Power Tools in Germany, they moved their incentive structure from individual-based to team-based. So a simple little shift forced in their KPIs that you've got to start working in multidisciplinary teams. And so that enhanced sort of the practice. So there's an organizational design piece that needs to be involved in the process, but certainly there are organizations out there, and it takes a long time, 10, 15 years as well, but you've got to really start at leadership and then work down, and then have those quick wins, those organizations where you can quickly show value, quickly show ideas and products and get people curious and then get the early adopters in. It is hard to just have a blanket change strategy. But yeah, we have seen it happen.
Next question.
Hello. Hi, Fred.
Can you introduce yourself, please, Pierre?
No, I'm not. You're going to do it. I'm Pierre. I have a question. So sometimes, or often, in the rest of the world, outside of our world, that design or aesthetic is seen as making something pretty. And I was wondering, what role, if any, do you think beauty and elegance play in problem solving and design thinking?
Well, beauty is equally so a human condition, and I think as humans we appreciate beauty in principle. It's just what do we regard as beautiful? So we might describe a thinker as remarkably elegant. Beauty sits in many different things. So, but I do think our leaning into beauty is what we seek. It's just in the world of design thinking, there are so many things that can be beautiful. I'm trying to think of a more abstract space, such as there's the beauty of design. But then there is this, there's a beautiful state of being which strategists search for, and just to find the link again with brand love, it's called resonance, right? It's that moment in which something just happens where it's perfectly in sync. And they're often related to brand building moments because there's something that D School stands for. And I mean, we've all done a walkabout and you've seen these beautiful collaborative spaces and they all facilitate design thinking. But then you have aha moments, moments of real deep beauty. You can feel it. They happen for brands when you deliver perfectly on what it is that you stand for. We refer to them as the most influential touch points or moments of connect. It's a total state of in-syncness. We seek those in everything that we do. So beauty sits in a great deal more than the tactile and the tangible. I think it's something that is deeply embedded in human nature.
I'm not going to add.
I think that was a great answer. Good question.
Tough
and
question.
A great answer. Thank you, Pierre.
And 2 books.
Yeah. And the price. Next question.
Greetings. I'm Dorozo Khadewe. So the question I have is for Richard. You mentioned that disciplines like humanities and law are being introduced to design thinking in order to implement it in their specialties. So the question that I have, it seems like design thinking is introduced at the later stage of higher learning. Are there plans that the D School or perhaps the partners take initiative of to introduce design thinking to early development stages, like your primary schools until high school?
No, thanks. Great question. So, yes, to answer your question, we do a lot of programs at a school level. At the university, what we're trying to do and position a number of our courses is that we want students to come in with a depth of some discipline, so that you have a law student and an engineering student coming in with a perspective on a problem, and they've been taught to see the world differently. They've got different vocabulary, and that's a reality of the real world. That, you know, when they, as a graduate attribute, when they graduate, they're going to find themselves in environments where they've got to work across disciplines. So we have programs that are targeted at students that do come in with a depth and discipline. However, in the ideal world, we shouldn't have to exist. So we've got a program that we're running with the Siemens Foundation to bring design thinking into schools in the STEM subjects. So looking at how you can bring this mindset in and get students to start working with sort of more problem-based learning type approach, where the teachers become more a facilitator of a process and the students are working with each other. They don't have depth of knowledge, but they're learning how to work with each other. And in the South African context is learning also how to work across different cultures, because we're so diverse. And that's where a lot of the diversity sits, and also the innovation. So you often don't even have to have that depth of knowledge. Just the fact that you come from different backgrounds can really feed into the innovation. But there we're teaching the teachers how to bring that into their work and into their lesson plans. We're not teaching directly to the students like we do at the university. Yeah.
And perhaps just in addition, the most incredible design thinkers are 2-year-olds.
Sweet.
2-year-olds gain dexterity, and they have the curiosity of kind. They have the confidence to collaborate. They are remarkably creative. So there is a lot that we achieve as a society between the ages of 2 and where a great deal of erosion takes place. And that's something to think about as well. 2-year-olds are instinctive design thinkers.
Jess?
Hi, I'm Jess, founder of Aurora Natural Skincare. As entrepreneurs, we are being encouraged to come up with more climate-adaptive solutions. And as much as it is human-centric, it's more now people, planet, and purpose. And like me, for instance, whatever I do is going to affect, the products I make is going to affect your daily lives, but our oceans, you know, everything, there's an impact on the environment. But how do you stay or evolve your design thinking and remain like in that creative, innovative space without getting bogged down? It's very overwhelming if you think long-term, the effects of what's going to happen, without worrying about compliance or anything else. But how do you like allow the creativity to flow and evolve that thinking to think not just about what's happening now, but long-term? You know, like my tagline is giving people the freedom to choose what ends up on your skin and in our oceans. But like when it comes to like sitting and thinking in that space, what do you suggest? You know?
So if you look at the birth of design thinking, it really started, its focus was around developing a product or an experience or something like that, and very defined, a single end user who let's design for that person. The world, I wouldn't say the world has moved on, but design has moved on to now try and play more of a role in these more complex spaces. Climate change being one, food security, gender-based violence, things like that. And a lot of the traditional tools and methodologies way back then just don't apply anymore, because they were focusing on products and services and experiences, really. And what we're finding is you can still apply the same mindsets, but your problem is more complex, and therefore your solution often is more complex. And if you look at the first law of cybernetics, it talks about requisite variety, that if you're trying to influence a system at a certain level of complexity, the thing you influence it with must have the same level of complexity. So it means your design solution must be complex in itself. And so often it could be multiple interventions, which itself is a system, interconnected, which then starts to confuse the traditional problem solvers where you're trying to have a controlled experiment. Let's do one thing and see what happens. That doesn't work anymore. So now you're doing multiple things which are all interconnected. And if something changes, you actually don't know exactly what it was that caused that change. But it's still having that desire to keep going and to, if something's changed, fantastic, let's keep going, let's keep trying. You may not fully understand exactly what it is that was the one thing, or it probably wasn't, it was probably a collection of those. But the fact is you still are following a journey of trying to change or add value to the system. And you just be comfortable with the fact that you may be never really fully going to understand exactly what it was that you did. It might emerge over time as things settle, but you've got to be comfortable with the complexity of your solution and maybe not fully understanding exactly the DNA of it. Yeah.
Perhaps just also from a strategic marriage, I mean, you know, design thinking, discovery, and so forth, is to really understand yourself in terms of your reason for existing in the first place. And that should be captured in a strategic statement of intent. There's a reason why you exist as an entrepreneur and eventually as a brand and so forth. If you lean into that with integrity in all that you do, addressing sustainability, value creation over time, shared value, all of these concepts is instinctively driven by your reason for existence in the first place. And it never becomes a tag-on CSR initiative or attempt to engage responsibly with a community. This is who I am, this is the reason why we exist. A natural extension would be to do the following in my community. Lean into that reason, not out of it, and create natural, organic connects with your reason for existence. It's a very natural way of being.
Okay, we have another question at the back.
Hi there, my name's Karen. I work for a fintech called IDR. I sit on the Exco, and I think one of the problems that I have is none of us know what design thinking is. So my question is twofold. One, how do I explain what design thinking is to the rest of the Exco? And two, practically, how do I put design thinking into place from Exco down?
It relates, I think, greatly to the answer that you gave in terms of start with leadership. Another element to consider is to find, by example, the things that might already exist in your environment in which you are instinctively practicing design thinking. There are often natural ways of practice within an organization where you could say, can you see how you're going about developing personas, UX journeys, and that is a natural, instinctive patterning of design thinking, mindful, respectful of. So sometimes celebrating the achievements in place could be a starting point, but I would really invite a design thinker into the conversation with leadership, and to do so respectfully, because, and Richard and I touched on this earlier in conversation, is it's not something that you dip into and dip out of, and great stuff. R&D did a bit of a design thinking intervention. We're good to go for the next 5 years. It's a way of thinking and doing that you need to respectfully invest in all that you do. And Richard mentioned HR. I think that's one domain that is so desperately in need of design thinking on every level possible. That, yeah, but equally so, there are living examples of design thinking in practice, and they just need to be showcased in a way.
Can I quickly add to that? So I spent 4 or 5 years in public sector embedding a culture of design thinking, and what I found works the best is to, first of all, leave the label outside completely. Don't even call it design thinking, because somebody will put their hand up saying, hey, we've done agile, like, why do we need to do design thinking now? And so deconstruct it and reconstruct it into a language that your colleagues understand. So, talk about, do we want to become more of a learning organization? Do we want to collaborate more across our various business units? Do we want to be more creative in our thinking? And start there. And, if there's appetite, then, invite them in for an experience. But to go in and say, I want to bring design thinking in, you'll get the pushback on day one. So I always find is leave the language at the door, just reconstruct it in the language which will resonate with them, and then get 2 hours, 3 hours of their time, give them that experience, and then have the discussion afterwards once they've felt it. Then you can call it whatever you want. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Chanel, and I'm a free-range designer. A couple of weeks ago, Fred sent out an email with a super annoying subject line. And the reason why it was super annoying was because it just stuck in my mind since then. And the subject line was, where does joy reside? And I thought that was such a good question. So he gave away the secret for all of you who didn't read to the bottom. So he basically said that it's when you pursue your passion. So my question for both Carla and Richard is, have you always known where your joy resides? Or did it take some design thinking to get you to pursue your passion?
So I was one of those students at school that was really good at art and maths as well. And I wanted to, so I started my career as an engineer. And I was a very frustrated creative engineer. And I had this passion, for whatever reason, to design a telephone, something a human being would pick up, and I don't know where that passion came from. But I deliberately decided to work out how I would get to that point of designing a telephone one day. And so went to art and design college overseas, studied industrial design, specifically for engineering graduates, and landed up in the product design space, and eventually landed up designing my telephone it's a decked phone for Alcatel. So there was a deliberate intention. I had no idea what I would do after that, but I certainly had identified a sort of a waypoint in my life that I wanted to try and get to. And funnily enough, it's actually out of Stanford, they developed a course called Design Your Life. And so, and it's actually an amazing book. It's Bill Burnett is the author, but it actually shows you how you can find your passion through a design process, whether it's your career, whether it's your personal life. So I think you can design it. I guess I naturally found my way there. But I think by reading this book, it will actually give you a really good direction, to find that passion.
Can you repeat the book again, Bill Burnett?
It's Design Your Life by Bill Burnett.
Bill Burnett.
Yeah, Stanford, one of the Stanford faculty members, yeah.
I think there's, in many ways, the serendipity of life and things that just overlap over time, and an incredible, where's the man of beauty? Where has he gone? There we go.
Pierre, where are you? Stand up.
You've moved the cheese. A beauty in growing older and maturing in your own mind and getting a sense of self that I think also plays a critical role. I'm also blessed to be surrounded by remarkable people who amaze me in their thinking and doing, and I think that affects you as well in your sense of joy. But the final moment arrived in undertaking a corporate project where I suddenly realized I am completely out of my depth. And my primary role is strategy and making sense of ways of connecting with markets in creative ways, so usually disruptive in kind. And then I realized this is not about strategy. This challenge is all about alignment and people needing to connect with a particular idea, not because they have to, but because they actually want to. And this took me into a space where I undertook a coaching program for a full and complete year, because I realized that my ability to actually frame questions and lean into questions to uncover confidence and for people to self-discover is not as well developed as it should be. I'm by far not there yet, but that has become a source of joy. So I think leaning into different things and allowing serendipity to just touch you, and then I apparently also have what one of my bosses has described as a naive optimism at points in time. So a research design was once described as you find yourself on the lunatic fringe of, and I thought that was the greatest compliment. That's remarkable. So I think be yourself, find the serendipity and things, circles connect with circles, and spend a bit of time reflecting to uncover what it is that you need to perhaps craft and develop over time as well, and could stand better at. I'm amazed by soft skills and how tough it is to simply hear, to really hear and to uncover what people genuinely think and feel, and not to assume, gosh, that's, yeah.
Very cool. The lunatic fringe. You're in a safe place in a room of entrepreneurs. Just saying. Okay, we have a question.
Finally have it.
Yes.
Here we go. Okay, so I'm Michelle. I run a startup called AdBot, and we help other startups advertise online using AI and all sorts, right? So small businesses are really a bit of a passion of mine. My background is I studied fine arts and then moved into design and somehow landed up as an entrepreneur. So design thinking I've probably been trained in it, and I really don't even know that I use it. So my passion, like I said, is SMMEs, and I was wondering, do you think, or do you have any evidence of if SMMEs have gone through a design training process of sorts, are they more sustainable? And in other words, do they last longer than other SMMEs? And then the second part of that question is that if there is evidence, how is that put together maybe in a package that we can offer to SMMEs in the world, Africa specifically?
I mean, there are case studies that show, it's interesting your background, and you probably have the design DNA as part because of the study path that you took. There's a lot of case studies, not maybe, I don't know necessarily in South Africa, but certainly in Silicon Valley, where organizations that are led by a CEO that has a design mindset, so they've come from a design background, be it product design or graphic design, have been more successful than those which are maybe been a startup from somebody from a finance background or something like that. So I don't know specifically of any research studies, but there's definitely case studies that shows that. How do you package it?
How do you teach more engineers?
Yeah. So I think it's it's interesting for me. I studied art and design at an art college and became a designer, went into the private sector, got very frustrated that nobody understood design. You know, we're going to all these design conferences and everybody is moaning and bitching about nobody understands us as designers, nobody can see us, the value that we bring. And so I made a shift to the other side, went to business school, and it was at business school they actually introduced me to the term or the label design thinking. And I thought that was very interesting. Here I'd gone and studied art and design. I've been practicing design for 15 years, and nobody had ever told me anything about design thinking. In fact, at the design college, they didn't term it, they didn't label it. They just taught you that way of being. And so what was interesting for me is the way the rest of the world saw this way of being, and it's actually there, for me, lay the essence of, well, how do you package it? Because I think the designers struggle to package it. You know, if you ask an architect, so how do you design? They probably won't be able to answer that. They say, well, you know, it's this black box of kind of thinking. But you speak to somebody who has, maybe from a business background, been introduced to the concepts and mindset of design, they could probably put it into a bit more of a structure. So I think what's important is to bring, you know, it's interesting the design, even the D School, we find it easier when we're training facilitators or coaches to take people from the non-design world and train them to be coaches in design thinking than it is to take designers and try and train them. So I think it's you know, I would say find somebody in the organization that's maybe not a design thinker and get them to package it in a way that they perhaps see it. Because you've got to sell it in a language that other people are going to understand, and you can't often use the design language in that space. But it can be it can be packaged. You know, I mean, that's what we do here in the learning journey, and depending on your audiences. But it's the language that you use and the experiences that you give them are so critical. And there's many, you know, IDEO University. You know, you can do a design thinking course there. Acumen Foundation. There's more human-centered design, but there's a lot of online programs actually that exist. So it's also a very competitive market now. 20 years ago, nobody was doing it. Now there's a lot of people introducing design thinking. So it's probably start in the online space initially, and then work out, do I tailor make it for a specific context? Because most of the online is from the global north, and so perhaps, you know, there's an opportunity for our context to bring something in the language. And in fact, we're just about to start a research program across Africa to map the different languages in design thinking to see the subtleties that exist, because the word design means something very, even locally, very different in English to perhaps Swahili, to Arabic, to, you know, to Francophone. So there's also the nuances in the language is a challenge when you're trying to teach this. Yeah.
I think Richard and I are both instinctively going, do we have evidence? You touch on a valuable study. I can recall after the financial crisis that Harvard Business Review conducted a study on how many CEOs of companies directly engaged in perhaps the original causes of a systemic global financial crisis graduated from which business schools. And that in itself was an interesting study. So perhaps we can focus on those best practice companies, brands, organizations in a few years, and consider their leadership and where they and how they shape their thinking. In addition, as a SMME, and experiencing growth as well, just remember that design thinking is an ongoing conversation, like many other things would be an ongoing conversation. That was a deep learning for us at Vega at a point in time when you grow beyond your founder circles and your campfire grows larger, that you can never assume that a culture, a way of thinking and being would grow organically by osmosis. It's an ongoing conversation. And as individuals join, as strategic partners align with you, they become part of that conversation. They become the conversation. And if you really invest in innovation, then you begin to co-create. I mean, it's not about owning that original founder principle or, the founder model. It has to evolve. So that ongoing conversation is critical. Stimulating yourself with the guys or examples that do it instinctively. I find the content creators, the streamers, incredibly intriguing to follow because they're co-creating at such a rapid rate that every individual interfacing and co-streaming, they're literally creating product on the roll. So manage your brand when your product is live 24/7, and every conversation can affect what people think, feel, believe.
Wow, yeah, that's true.
It's, multi-screen, 24/7 co-creation every step of the way. So look at the dynamics of it, the conditions of it, the nature of it, interesting examples around us, but it's an ongoing conversation.
That's interesting.
You can also sign up to Heavy Chef, and there will be a recipe shortly on design thinking based on your question. Okay, so we've got one more question, and then we have an AI algorithm that has been furiously transcribing all of what's been said tonight to come up with the best question, which we will... I'm joking. We're not really doing that. It's Bronwyn is sending me WhatsApp messages to, I think, this person. So we'll get to the answer based on the team's decision, and we're going to award the prize, and then we're going to come to a close. So we have one more question over there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ibanati. My question is informed by the historical context of South Africa and obviously the huge gaps in poverty, etc. So I think it's easy to assume as a company such as Heavy Chef, which is interested in entrepreneurship and how design thinking speaks to that. I think it's easy to assume that customers or whoever the product is designed for has free will has free will. Their decision making as to getting the product is sort of like is off of free will. So I think it's important to understand that in many ways, how we think or how we behave, it is shaped by how society has played out, and obviously with the historical context of being marginalized as South Africa, I think. Okay, my point is how does the company make sure that it doesn't fall into the trap of exacerbating issues such as marginalization of certain groups of people? How does it speak to such problems? Because I think, especially that it's concerned with entrepreneurship, I think it essentially advantages certain kinds of people. So how does it speak to those problems? How does it make sure that it doesn't exacerbate those problems? How can design thinking be used to speak to those problems? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll give a bit of perspective on that. I think, first of all, one of the things we need to be very conscious of is as we create more designers, design is a very powerful tool to have, and the influence that can have. So as organizations, being very mindful of the power and privilege that you have as an organization in the products and services or whatever it is that you're trying to do and what effect that might have. and to be very aware of that. And I think there's many case studies that one, I mean, even go back as far as in 1930s with plastic. You know, the engineers and chemists were designing plastic. They thought this was the greatest thing. And look what's happened, you know, almost 100 years later. And the influence that's had on the planet and the challenges that's caused from a sort of a social perspective. So I think, first of all, as we democratize this way of thinking, we've got to be very mindful of the impact that it can have. Within the organization, for us, what we talk about also living the behavior. So when we talk about being human-centered or the mindful of the systemic nature of the world that we're trying to go into, is also looking at ourselves and making sure, are we living it ourselves? And we often talk about empathy in human-centered design, and you know, empathy happens at different levels. Is the empathy of the person I'm trying to design for or with out there. It's the empathy I have as the team, as us, and also the empathy for me. Who am I? And I think it's important to always hold that in place so that you're keeping these issues top of mind and discussing them and debating them as a team, so that you are living that behavior and it's not just a tick box exercise maybe in your value-based system or your the product or service that you're developing as an organization.
A very thoughtful way to end the evening, and a thoughtful question. Thank you. I think these are important challenges in this country, and I mean, I think anyone living and working in South Africa can only know. And I mean, look at the room that, you know, we have a non-homogeneous society, one that is diverse and rich and alive with possibilities, but at the same time is subject to a lot of marginalization, and we need to be careful of that, and to be mindful of that, and to be empathetic, and to be humble when we go into these situations, not pretending that we have all the answers. But I think maybe that's where some of the lessons of design thinking can actually apply. And certainly from a heavy chef perspective, you know, the clue is in the name. You know, we listen to people who eat their own food, who can speak with authority, who've actually been in the trenches. And I think it's a very wonderful way to end off the evening. Thank you. I'm going to, however, just have a little bit of fun with this, because we have a winner. So it wasn't an AI, it was the Heavy Chef team at the back there. And I believe that it was, if I can just open up my iPad again, it was Marilee Smith from Brand Love for the question of how to implement in Corp. I will give you your prize afterwards. Thank you very much. And then just a reminder to everybody that did get a book. Inside there is a voucher for 3-0. You'll note there are 2 banners at the side of the room there. I'd encourage everybody who did get a book and a voucher. By the way, those books from xneelo, we're super proud of, by the way. That's a collaboration with the xneelo Massive. I think we're getting to the end of the print run, so they're super valuable, just in their own right. But the vouchers are worth 1,999 Rand. And so do speak to Andrew Collins. Where's Andrew? There he is, on the side there. And ask him about the AI-generated 30-minute workout that you're going to do that has had a lot of design thinking, no doubt, applied into the creation thereof. And have fun with it. Just a last note, just to say thank you to, first of all, our 2 wonderful speakers tonight. Please can we give them a rousing round of applause. And also thank you to everyone in the room for coming out and for being in the trenches yourselves. And I hope that you get to meet some interesting people tonight. And do feel free to network and engage with each other. And I hope that you all have a very prosperous business ahead. Thank you very much. Take care.